Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hive Jive. We hope that you are doing great. Hi, Miss Natalie. How are you doing today?
Howdy, howdy. I'm doing fantastic. How's everybody doing? We're happy to be back here.
Yes. We are joined today by a very special guest. We are going to be talking to Miss Angela Tollerson. And Angela is a certified master beekeeper through the University of Montana. She has been beekeeping for quite a while. She's actually almost a legacy beekeeper by a couple generations removed. So
Ooh.
this will be real fun to go through and kind of get a perspective on her region, how she got into beekeeping, and we are so excited to have you today. Welcome, Angela. Thank you for joining us on the Hive Jive.
Thank you for having me. I have been a fan of your podcast since I first started beekeeping, and it's a little bit surreal to now be a guest here. I was listening to it when you and Ken were the hosts years ago. This is this is really neat to actually be a guest here. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am flattered. The honor is literally ours. I think somewhere in the back of my head, I forget that literally people can hear us everywhere.
Right.
What's interesting is when I go somewhere and somebody recognizes me, or if I'm doing a presentation and then like it takes a minute to sink in, like, oh yeah, or somebody will come up and say something, and the first thing that goes through my mind is, how the hell do you know that? And then they're like, I listened to the podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Like,
I'm
Right?
personally,
Right?
I'm thrilled and I'm really excited to have you on the program because I love everything you've done for the groups and everything and what you the way you think about and think through beekeeping and everything very thoughtfully and very smartly. It's just I'm really thrilled to finally get to talk to you.
Oh, that's so great. I feel the same way about you. I'm always so impressed when you jump in to help other beekeepers and your knowledge and your capacity of teaching. And we finally officially became friends on Facebook sometime in the
Yay!
last year. So yes.
Very
That's a
excited.
bond that's supposed to last a lifetime, right? You know?
Exactly. Thank you for being here today.
I am just surprised that Natalie made it through that entire thing and she said a lot of words that were very close to what I thought she would say, and she didn't. So kudos to you,
Oh,
Natalie.
what was I supposed to say or not supposed to say?
Be mindful. You were so
Be
close.
mindful. I know. I'm just very excited.
Oh,
I'm sorry. This is completely about Angela.
It was every one of those descriptive terms about how she approaches beekeeping. I was like, and the next one's going to be, and the next, oh, she didn't do it. What?
no, no, that's okay. Missed opportunity.
Oh,
It's
she'll
not.
get it in there. Trust me.
Yeah. At least once an episode.
At least once, unless I steal it from her at the end, and then she
Right.
she is jaw dropped and throws her for a loop. So,
Yes.
luckily she has put up with me long enough that she knows some of the little antics that I will do, like start the recording before she's ready, just to
As I'm in
see.
the middle of laughing. Yeah.
We got to keep ourselves entertained. So, okay, Angela, um, I know that beekeeping has been a part of your life for a very long time.
Yes, yes. So a couple generations back. So my great uncle, his name was Tom Roberts, and he was the deputy agricultural commissioner for Sonoma County in California. And he taught agriculture to students for many years, and he was a beekeeper. Yes. And I
That is
do have his
awesome.
hive tool. Yes.
So, at what point in your life did you decide to seriously get involved with beekeeping then?
Well, I always knew I was going to from a very young age because of my experience with him. I went and visited his workplace, his bees. He would talk about bees and agriculture, um, and then I kind of kept living in small lots in towns, right? And the perception for people is that's not an adequate place to keep bees, which we now know is just fine. You can keep bees in a lot of backyards, especially in Montana. There are no special laws about where you live to keeping bees. But in my mind, it had to wait until I lived out on land. I finally acquired that land 9 years ago. I have 10 acres on a river surrounded by farmland. And the very first thing that happened, we put in this cute little water feature that was absolutely swarmed by bees. And I didn't understand why. It turns out my neighbor, who is a commercial beekeeper, his bees were using my pond as their water source. And I thought, hey, I think I'm a beekeeper. I'm almost there. The bees they're in my pond. And so it was that winter I made the decision to become a beekeeper for real. Yeah.
That is awesome. I love those instances where the bees kind of show up. You've already made the decision, you've committed to it, you're getting started, but you're not there yet. And then all of a sudden they just start showing up. It's like, we're ready. Are
Yes,
you ready? We're here.
exactly. It was kismet. It was. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Natalie, feel free to jump in at any point. I have like a thought process, but
Oh
just
yeah, no, I'm still starstruck, so I'm good. I'm just kind
okay.
of listening in. And
Oh.
so what did you start? How many when you decided to jump in, what did you do? What was your thought process, and how many did you go with? Did you go to classes or anything? What happened?
I did. So when I made that decision that summer, I immediately started going to a club. And I didn't acquire bees immediately because that was in the summer. And as we know, it's a little too late to purchase bees at that point. But I did start attending a local club. I went to that club all through the winter, did a lot of reading, prepared, and then I purchased 2 nucleus colonies, as you do. And then, as you do, I split them because I heard that the more colonies you have, the more likely you are to get at least some through the winter. It was a very green decision. It was a newbie decision and a poor decision because you don't want to split your nukes first time and expect them to get through the winters of Montana. And so that really was an impetus that drove me to actually learn what I'm doing to try to get the bees to survive better up here. So, and that was, so this is my 8th season now keeping bees. So that was a little over 8 years ago. Yeah.
It
And how many
sounds
you got?
Now I have 5. There's been some years where I've had 12.
Cool.
There's been some years where I've only had 2. Usually I capture swarms. Either I will collect them when the community reports them, or I will capture them in traps. For the longest time, I did not purchase bees ever. I was sustainable simply by capturing bees, doing splits from my survivors. In the last few years, I have started purchasing at least 1 nucleus colony as a insurance backup for myself because I am now a bee teacher at a local college. I teach beekeeping classes, and I like to have a hands-on experience for them the second week of May. The problem with Montana is that our swarm season doesn't start until June. And so if there was a catastrophic winter where I lost all of my bees, I would not have bees to allow my students to get into the first week of May. So as an insurance, I've purchased bees. It's turned out year after year, I didn't need to. I've always had survivors of some sort each year, but I still do that, at least to make sure that the students have something to experience.
That's very smart. It also,
Yeah.
I hear a very common trajectory in here, and I love it because it is that you were inspired, you had the passion, and then you spent a lot of time where you couldn't have them. So you filled that void by learning and researching and reading. And then eventually, by the time you got your first colonies, you were very well educated, at least from the book smart perspective. You had a great idea of what to do. You had been involved in a club, so you've had mentors, you've got people you'd bounce ideas off of, hear other perspectives. That's amazing.
Mhm.
I love that because that's what we want. It's the cringe factor of the, oh, I thought it would be great, so I ordered 10. Have you
Yeah.
ever been to a class? No. Have you ever been to a meeting? No. Have you read a book?
Yep.
Not really. You know, like-
Yep. Yeah, and I always have a mixed sampling of those students in my May class. Half of them, they're preparing for next year, and I love that. I say, yes, please prepare long in advance. And then about half of them are, I installed my bees last week. What do I do now? Oh my gosh. And just like this desperation, and they need all the information packed in right that week because they're already 2 weeks into the process and they don't know what they're doing. And that's fine. They're still going to learn either way, but I definitely prefer the first route. Yeah.
So we recommend in our classes as much as possible. And when we teach at the clubs and everything, we tell people it's great if you want to learn, if you have the patience to learn for about a year, so that you know what you're doing, where to get your bees, when to get them, what to look for, having
Yes.
fundamentals of bee biology and all this stuff. And instead, I mean, the opposite is fine. I kind of did that actually. I bought bees and I was like, okay, well, I have bees. But it's kind of drinking from a fire hose at some point, right? Because if you want to care for
It
them
is.
and you don't know
Yeah.
even a single thing about bee biology, you're kind of setting yourself up for some challenges.
Yeah.
You are, and in my area, one of the cringiest thought processes that I have when I find out that they've already purchased their equipment and their bees without conferring with me is that the type of equipment that you use in Northwest Montana is critical. And I'm afraid they've already taken the step of purchasing your basic 3/4 inch thick wood hives
Yes.
that are sold throughout, and that's not going to get them through Northwest Montana winters. And I think that's my concern more than anything, is that they've spent money in a direction that they might end up just having to reverse once they've taken a class from me.
Yeah, that's something that we know all too well because we preach a lot about, you know, insulation and the thickness of the wood and how inadequate that little 3/4 inch by the time it's all said and done can be.
With
So
the chimney
yeah,
effect, the vertical stack, and that makes things worse even. So yeah, I mean
Mhm.
that's one of the things we do as well. And it's probably in your area, it's very exceptional how much cold weather there is, right? But in a lot of areas around us, we try to kind of tell them they have choices between backyard style hives and commercial hives. So that's another aspect of things where they don't have the same constraints from the standpoint of what kind of goals and philosophies they have or what kind of constraints they have. But in your case, you have also the additional constraint of that extreme cold for long periods of time.
You have the cold. I also have a lot of people who are closer to retirement age who are just thinking about doing this for the first time. It's a lifelong dream they've had. They're just thinking about getting into it. And then when I take them to my apiary and let them lift an 80-pound box, they
Yeah.
suddenly start to question their hive style that they picked out and chose. And if I were able to insert myself in the decision-making process, maybe I could push them towards a horizontal hive approach, so that the heaviest that they're picking up is a 10-pound frame as opposed to an 80-pound box. So those are all considerations that are very worthy of doing your research long before you actually purchase anything.
That's
so
music to my ears, because we talk about that as well, as far as people don't realize how heavy the boxes are in the vertical stacks, right? So and the
No.
horizontal stack, their horizontal configuration has better thermodynamics all the way around, right? So
Yes, yes.
so out of your 5 colonies, what hive styles do you have that you work with?
Yeah, so I tend to work with layens and Langstreths, but my Langstreths are polystyrenes. They're not wood.
Oh, ooh,
Yes.
interesting. Okay.
polyhives.
Polyhives, yes. Not the greenest choice, but definitely the most survivability.
Well, they're trade-offs, right? And there's exceptional
There
stuff.
are.
I was gonna say, I
Yes.
think Natalie and I may have talked about that, but luckily for you and everybody else, nobody's gonna hear that for like a year. So
There you go. There are green options if you're willing to put a bit of effort into it, and I'm willing to discuss that if we want to go into that. Yeah.
so the lay-ins, that is something that, you know, we're familiar with. We've talked about long layings and lay-ins and the horizontal type beekeeping. Obviously, Natalie and I do a lot of top bar. But on the polystyrene though, is that it's way lighter, wouldn't it be? Like, even though it's more
It is.
insulated, it's way lighter to move the box anyway.
Yes. Yes. So it weighs, I would say somewhere between half and 2/3 the weight of the equivalent box, if you're
Wooden
talking
box.
about yeah,
Yeah.
of the wooden box. Yeah. Interestingly, the wall itself is thicker. It's about an inch and an inch and a quarter in thickness, but the internal dimensions are identical to a Langstreth's internal dimensions.
Okay.
Yeah, you can stack a basic wood box with a polystyrene.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you can. So you can mix and match if you really wanted to. I would just, and I think it's common to put wood supers over the top.
That's yep.
So you have the body be the polystyrene, but the supers are wood, and that's an acceptable way to do that too. So
Yeah, that was exactly where my mind went. The boxes that are going to go away and go into storage for the winter, sure, those can be wood, they're temporary, but the box that's going to overwinter would all
yeah,
be the same. Yeah.
yep.
What about your genetics? So if you're doing specific for the region and the area and having a lot of these cold kind of bursts come through in a shorter blooms period, what type of genetics do you prefer if you had to break it down into a lineage other than local?
Okay, so I'm gonna get on my soapbox here.
Yay! We love soapboxes.
There's only, in my mind, there are only two races, sub races of bee in North America. If you buy from a Russian breeder who is certified, one of 6 certified breeders, you're getting a true Russian, most likely 98.6% Russian. If you buy from any other breeder, you're getting the subrace North American bee. That's it.
Yeah.
Anybody who makes a claim to be selling an Italian, a Carniolan, a Caucasian, or any variation is simply probably referring to one single phenotype characteristic that is most representative by any
Body
of those
color.
probably
Italian
body
descent. Yeah.
now, to to be fair, there are personality traits within the different lineages, and I would be, it would be misleading to claim that there are not certain characteristics that would be present in those bees. So you're going to, if you buy 2 different nukes from 2 different suppliers that have the different queens, you're going to notice one queen where the bees tend to get out in the colder morning sooner than the other ones. You're going to note, so that might be your Carniolan flavor. And then you might have other bees that they build a really, really big nest and huge amounts of honey, but then they stink and eat through all of it in the fall and don't make it through the winter. That might be your Italian flavor, right? But I'm totally cracking John up.
I'm dying
Apparently,
over here. I love it.
I know.
Flavors.
Yeah.
I love the
So,
flavors.
yeah,
That was
your
the other thing
flavor,
too, is their flavors.
your flavors of bees. However, so you'll definitely have traits that are probably passed down through these lineages that are leftovers from these areas where bees have evolutionary developed from these different areas. But I'm going to venture to say that if any particular breeder were to mail their bee into a lab and pay the exorbitant fee to have them genetically tested, they're going to see 20% of this, 30% of that, 15% of this, 5% of that. And so when a breeder sells you a bee, they're either referring to the color, or hopefully, and you could have a conversation with them about this, a particular personality trait that's most attributed to that subrace. So for me, you would think that Italian bees were the last thing I would want to have up here in Northwest Montana, right?
Yeah.
I had 6 years of uninterrupted genetics of mothers and daughters from a VSH Italian queen born and raised in Missouri.
Ah.
Oh.
She made it, she and all of her progeny made it for 6 years straight up here in Northwest Montana. And I believe the key there was not whether she was Italian or not, but that because she had Varroa sensitive
Uh-huh.
hygiene and were able to keep the Varroa from eating on the young, the winter bees were able to sustain through the winters here. So there was less stress pressure of the cold in combination with parasitism. So I think that was the key.
I was gonna, when you first said VSH, I was like, that though that little acronym at the beginning is a big difference between that and just plain old Italian flavor.
Yes, flavor.
Yep, I love that. My favorite flavor is a Carniolan Russian mix. That's my preferred
Woo!
flavor.
That's
So
a spicy flavor, my friend. That's a spicy flavor.
well, the Carniolan kind of tempers down the Russian aspect, but they end up
Okay, so
being wonderful.
I have to jump in because I did get some Russians from one of the certified Russian
Like
suppliers
from
from the
Louisiana.
Federation. I forget what the club's name is, but and then everybody's been raving about how gentle they are, but maybe the crosses, the mixes with the F1s, that might be a little spicier. I don't know.
In my
F1s are
experience,
definitely, the F1 vigor can be pretty aggressive.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and that a lot of times what you find out is not the queen that you purchase, it's her daughter. And that's where
Right,
that,
exactly.
yeah, that's where that comes in. So that Russian Carniolan or pure Russian that you got in the mail and you put in there, everything may go great. But if you allow her to swarm or you raise queens off of her, that's when everything goes topsy turvy.
Yes, and that happened to me recently. I purchased queens from an outfit. I won't name them because I don't want to harm their business in any way or what they're doing. But they're down closer to the San Diego area, and they tout that they use pretty defensive, highly genetic, testing 100% hygiene for VSH hygiene. They use those queens, and then they breed them with Italian drones who test somewhere between 50 to 75% in hygiene and VSH. And the hope is to temper down the progeny by having more gentle bees who might not be as high in VSH, but might bring some of the more gentler characteristics. The result is probably hit and a miss. I was unlucky enough to receive this F1 combination, and they are the meanest bees I've ever experienced in my life. Last year, they put my husband in the hospital when they stung him
Oh,
already over 40 times in the face. He's not allergic to bees, but he still went into anaphylactic shock.
yikes.
And then just yesterday, I was stung by a sister queen from the same outfit. I was stung 13 to 14 times. And I did not have a reaction of any kind other than the localized that you would expect. But it's become very apparent that there's definitely some F1 vigor there from them purposely mating high testing VSH defensive bees with what they consider more temperate Italian subrace. And
Yeah.
it was pretty volatile personalities coming out of them.
Oh, I'm
Almost
sorry to
makes
hear
you
that.
question where they're getting the defensive aspect of their genetics.
In San Diego, I think we know the answer to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I was
Based
trying
on
to
the
tap dance around
listen
that one.
recording.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so
I think,
that's a
yeah.
problem that I think is becoming more and more prevalent. And like you joked at the beginning, it's funny, but it's unfortunately true. There is basically an American mutt. And
Yes.
you've got the commercial beekeepers that travel the country, the genetics get spread everywhere. Yes, you can bring in some purebred, but as soon as she open mates with anything around there, it's already starting to be diluted down. Your southern states, obviously you've got the Scutellatta genetics that can sneak in there. They're more vigorous on everything, mating and you name it. They emerge sooner. So they kind of have a little bit of a genetic advantage to get their material into the mix. So
Mhm.
if you live in a northern state where swarm season doesn't start till June and bees may not be even really available until late May, you have to order your queens from somewhere that has them, and oftentimes that's going to be a southern region, and then you end
Mhm.
up getting genetics that normally would not cross the Mason-Dixon line on their own accord that have now been shipped up to these northern states, and people can run into those like firecrackers all of a sudden. Yeah, it's I think becoming unfortunately way more common now than not. So
Yes, definitely. Very well put. That's exactly what we're experiencing up here.
yeah,
Mhm.
have you noticed that your purchased mated queens are arriving smaller than a virgin queen fresh out of your own colony when she crawls out of the cell?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hmm.
Just curious. My morning, I was literally 10 minutes away from doing this interview in a bee suit because I was running that far behind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But so we started off the day with a removal, then we went over and did a consultation with kind of a mentorship from some people in our organization here in town, and then I had to go out and finish all of my bee work and yard work and stuff. So this one individual, I swear, any odd 1% chance of, oh, it might happen, it's going to happen in their colony every time. We've never been over to there to do anything that wasn't like, okay, this is clearly not textbook, and this is not even something that most people would experience in the first 2 or 3 years, but you're going to get to do it. um, we split a colony. This, Natalie, this is the one that came out of winter ready to swarm in like the very beginning of March, and we split it, and both halves did great. and we went in to check and make sure that the original colony had raised the new queen and that everything looked great, which it did. They were building out into the other box. Everything was wonderful. We looked at the box that had the original queen. She apparently left about a week ago. There was literally no eggs or larvae of any kind whatsoever in there. Queen cells that were actively emerging in our hands.
Ooh.
And so I've got this new beekeeper that's like, oh my God, what do we do? And I was like, grab her. Like, because there's another one and another one and another one. They're literally just like pop tops opening and crawling out. And every time we picked up a frame, we found some that had just been killed and some that had been killed maybe a day or two before, and the bees were already chewing out the side of the cell to pull them out. So it was like queen chaos in there. Um, but that was fresh in my mind because I'm watching these fat little queens crawl out of these queen cells, and I'm like, you are literally twice the size of a purchased mated queen from any breeder.
So what's your take on that, Angela, the purchased queens from, queen breeders and everything?
It can be a combination of issues from what I understand. One would be that the impetus to get queens out quickly to people means that they're not allowing her the full 30 days of mature laying before they send her. And they need to get her out the door. It's just supply and demand. There's also quite a bit of research behind the concept that the variation of temperatures as she's traveling is going to be detrimental to her, specifically the sperm that she's carrying. And then finally, there's a reason that 7 days of not laying equals a queen who's so skinny she can fly off in order to swarm. And so her ovaries have lost the development that they've gained in that process. And so by the time somebody captures a queen, puts it in a cage, sends it to you, and it gets to you, I don't know if that process is happened exactly 2 days. It might not be as problematic, but then once you get her, let's say it's the best case scenario of 2 days from door to door, you've got to leave her in there with candy, and it's going to take those bees 3 days to let her out, right? 3 to 4. Otherwise, they might kill her. All of this time that her ovaries are losing, their development and regressing a bit. So it's possible that after laying for quite a while, that queen might reach the same proportions that you would see from your healthy queen. But I do know that many years while they were still going, the bee-informed partnership was reporting that there were almost equal amounts of concern that the people felt like their bees failed mite parasitism and queen issues were nearly equal. And we have to look at that strongly and see why are queen issues such a problem. So
what's your take on mite problems? Basically, colonies that have high number of mites sometimes thrive, and sometimes some that have a lower number of mites are not doing well. Do you think that could have anything to do with the quality of the queen themselves, and the problem with the mites being maybe a symptom of the underlying issue that the queen quality would be?
that's a very good question. I have not done any research, so I feel like I'm not prepared to answer that, in an educated way, what the impact is of mites themselves on the quality of a queen. So I'm not sure. But if you have any thoughts of, that you want to.
Yeah, for me, I tend to kind of, and it's more empirical than it is research based. I manage quite a few colonies, and I tend to kind of like observe what I'm looking at, and I've seen colonies with high numbers thriving, whereas some that didn't have necessarily a mite issue kind of fell prey to the parasitic mite syndrome. And so to me, intuitively, and it's not research based, it's more observation based or intuition based, that means to me that the mites are, for me, more of a symptoms of an underlying issue with either nutrition or queen quality, her fecundity, her fertility, her, how well she was mated, how she was raised, if she was grafted or natural swarm cells, all kinds of things like that. So that's my intuition. Yeah.
And I can add to that, there's definite connection and studies being done on the potency and the strength of drones and their sperm when they are being treated with miticides, and their inability to fly quickly. So we all know the story of how queens mate. They fly fast and hard and high, and the best of the best reach them. And it has been noted that drones that have been exposed to miticides, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, all struggle in having less flight ability, slower flight ability. Their longevity is slower. Their maturity takes longer. So we know that there's a maturity after they emerge before they have reached the height of their sperm maturity. All of these things are impacted by sides in general. So that would equate out to the queen herself struggling to produce her best offspring if the sperm that she has managed to get a hold of is in question. So
Yeah.
yes,
It's like a
I
computer
think that
algorithm. Garbage in, garbage out.
That's exactly
exactly.
what it is. Disproportionate amount
Exactly.
of garbage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
All right, so we've touched on a lot of things here in the realm of beekeeping, and kind of I think everybody has gotten a little bit of an insight into kind of how we're viewing things. And you recently did a video that was titled "Is Beekeeping Right for Me?" And
Mhm.
so I'm going to pivot for our last question here on the main segment and ask you, based on the current state of beekeeping today, do you feel like we need more beekeepers and to either get into the hobby or get into the business? What is your take on that?
So it's I'm going to answer this two ways. So it's not going to be the cut and dry answer you're expecting. We need less of one kind of beekeeper
Yes.
and more of another kind. And one of the things I like to joke, that presentation you were talking about that I did to our community. I like to joke at the beginning, I'm going to do my best to talk you out of beekeeping
Mhm.
this entire hour. And if you still want to at the end, then you might have the tenacity of spirit that is required to be a beekeeper. And I tell them, if you're doing this for honey, for pollination, to save the bees, to acquire other hive products, those are all great side effects of beekeeping. They're wonderful. But the one that is going to keep you keeping bees year after year is if you're doing this out of fascination.
Mhm.
So those are the kind of beekeepers I want to see, the beekeepers that are fascinated. I would also like to see beekeepers who understand the ecological synergy of bees and insects in general and agriculture. I feel like people who understand ecosystems and the ecologies of our insects and our agriculture are going to be much more successful, and they are going to have an impact in our country that's greatly needed. One of my favorite things to talk about, I am a regenerative farmer. I'm into regenerative agriculture. If anybody wants to see what that looks like, you could Google Jonathan Lundgren, and
Mhm.
he does some wonderful presentations on, and he is also a beekeeper, a chemical-free beekeeper who believes in proper healthy ecologies between agriculture and bees. He's also one, Nathalie, that has coined that exact same phrase you use, that mites are just a symptom of an
Mhm.
unhealthy bee ecology.
Mhm.
And he would be a great resource for people to look into. But I would like to see a lot more people who become so aware of the ecology of bees and agriculture and insects in general that they're able to, through a grassroots movement, to require what we need of legislation to improve agriculture and insects, and therefore ecosystems in general in our country. So
Let's
That was
band up.
Long-winded answer.
No,
I'm
that
sorry.
was a fantastic answer. Like, I really think that you have set the bar really high
Yes.
for everybody else that has to answer this question going forward. And nobody wants cut and dry, right? We don't want a
Yeah,
simple
right,
yes or
right.
no. Like, that was
Right.
perfect. That was well spoken, well said.
Yeah.
Well
Like,
thought out.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
it might have been
Very
mindful.
mindful.
We did it!
Yeah. Thanks,
She
Angela,
got it
for
in there.
plugging it in.
Oh man. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Angela. We have greatly appreciated getting to talk to you today.
You
And for
bet.
everybody else, if you would like to hear more with our interview with Angela, please join us over on Patreon. You'll get to hear even more in-depth things and questions that we go into. So we look forward to having you there and being with us. And to sign off here, we usually have some bee-themed thing. And so I'll kick it off just so nobody can steal mine. So thank you guys for tuning in. We hope to talk to you next week, but until then, be good.
And don't forget to be mindful.
Be wonderful.
Be wonderful. And that is a wonderful
I
answer.
love it. I love it. That's awesome. Thank you, Angela, for being here today. We'll
Thank
talk
you
to
so
you on the
much.
other side.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
This Hive Jive production was made possible by amazing patrons like you, and we appreciate your support. To all our Hive Jive junkies out there, you truly are the bee's knees.